Good evening and welcome to this edition of Africa in Focus with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, podcaster, and entrepreneur. And in this week's edition of Africa in Focus is a special. We're looking at why the white man killed Michael Jackson and also his legacy. That's the theme for this week's show, why the white man killed Michael Jackson. Okay, so before we get into this week's show, if you like what you hear, please share it to your friends, family, social media networks. Please subscribe, if you've not already, to Ghana Africa in Focus podcast on YouTube, and also Ghana Africa in Focus on Spotify. All right, and if you want to donate to a show, just send us a kind donation. All donations are accepted, and you can donate as little as $3 a month, and we'll be grateful for any donations we get. All right, so let's get into the podcast this week. Why the white man killed Michael Jackson. So the 25th of June will be exactly 16 years since the death of Michael Joseph Jackson, who is the greatest entertainer of all time, and there will never, ever be a talent like Michael Jackson. So this podcast basically is on two parts. So we'll tell you why the white man killed Michael Jackson, and he was not killed by no drugs. You know, we'll go into details to why the white man killed Michael Jackson. But also, we want to talk about the legacy because, you know, the mainstream media want to destroy Michael Jackson's legacy by, you know, saying that he was a pedophile, you know, when he was never convicted of any so-called pedophilia. So we'll tell you why the white man can never destroy the legacy of Michael Jackson and what the legacy and what that particular legacy is. All right, so, you know, before I tell you the reasons why the white man killed Michael Jackson, let's just go, you know, talk about the legacy. Because, you know, like I said, you don't hear much of Michael Jackson music in the mainstream media, whether it's in the UK, Europe, or US, certainly in the US, because Michael Jackson was hated in the US towards the end of his career. In actual fact, he was thinking of relocating to another country, I think Dubai, before he was killed. And so, you know, the media, you know, because obviously the white man controls the media, the dissemination of information, yeah, they want to destroy the legacy of Michael Jackson and pin this, you know, this baseless, false agenda that Michael Jackson was a pedophile and that kind of thing, when they know that he was not that he was acquitted twice, not once but twice, when the case, apparently, in quote, of Michael Jackson raping young boys went to court. Yeah, and we'll tell you why also, you know, that charge of pedophilia was pinned on Michael Jackson. But let's start with the legacy. So undoubtedly, why Michael Jackson is the greatest entertainer ever in history of the music industry. Not this thing that the white man goes about Elvis. No. Unlike Michael Jackson, Elvis didn't write his own songs. Elvis stole black people's music. So, for example, I'll give you two examples. Most of Elvis' early hits were written by Otis Blackwell. Yeah, for example, Jailhouse Rock and Don't Be Cruel, which are massive Elvis hits, but they're written by a black man, African American, called Otis Blackwell. Also, another of Elvis's tunes was actually a copy by the original, which was done by African American musician Mama Bessie Thornton. Yeah, so Elvis was basically someone who stole black music, and like many other white artists after, have used black music as to make themselves rich, but without actually, you know, giving credence to the source. And the source is African American music, yeah, which has its origins in Africa. So, jazz, blues, soul, funk, hip hop, rap, all these musical formats that were popularized by Africans who were taken to America as enslaved Africans, yeah. These art forms of music were popularized by Africans in America, but all of these art forms had their root in Africa. So from African folk songs through to, some of the African spirituals that Africans who were enslaved sung on the slave ships and on the plantations, to even some of the African instruments that emulated and created things like blues and even some of the guitar music that led to things like jazz and also, country and western. Don't forget, country and western is not a white man form of music. No, it was called country and blues until white people, Europeans, as usual, caught up black music and they called it country and western. But no, the original country music was done by African artists. And so, given that all popular music, had its root in Africa, yeah, Michael Jackson used it to great effect. So, one of the legacies of Michael Jackson is that he has the biggest selling album ever in the history of popular music, namely Thriller. Thriller is the only album to sell over 100 million units. No other album in history of popular music has sold over 100 million copies. Yeah? Another legacy of Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson revolutionized videos. So before Michael Jackson, videos were just boring. They're just like, they weren't even telling a story. They were just mundane tools that artists use to promote their singles. However, Michael Jackson took video to another level and more importantly, revolutionized the art of videos when he released Thriller in 1992. So Thriller contains 3 classic music videos, namely Beat It, Billie Jean, and the title track Thriller, of which became the most successful music video of all time, Thriller. The Making of Thriller by Michael Jackson is the most successful music video of all time. Yeah. And 5 of Michael Jackson's records, i.e. Beat It, Billie Jean, Thriller, I think Black or White and They Don't Care About Us. He's the first artist to have 5 videos streamed more than 1 billion times on YouTube. Yeah. No other artist, whether it's Beyonce, Eminem, Bruno Mars, whoever you are, all those artists, by the way, were influenced by Michael Jackson. So none of these artists, right, have had 1 billion streams on any of their videos. But Michael Jackson has had 5 videos being streamed 1 billion times plus or more. Yeah? That's another legacy of Michael Jackson. Added to that, like I said, the video. So now, when we see videos, right, we take for granted about music videos, but Michael Jackson, he was a pioneer of using music videos as a tool to promote music and also made it into an art form. Yeah. Again, before Michael Jackson, it was very difficult for African American artists or Black artists to feature videos in the mainstream, primetime TV. So around about the early 80s, 81, 82, MTV, music television, had just appeared. Yeah. And for the first 2 years, they did not play any videos by any African American or Black artists. Yeah. And so when Michael Jackson put out Billie Jean, the head of CBS Records told MTV that if you don't play Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, we're not going to let you play any other artists. Yeah. And so CBS back then had a massive catalog or had a massive array of musicians who had records out that were being aired on MTV. And so MTV could not afford for a company like CBS not to allow its videos to be played on their station. And so they were pushed into playing Michael Jackson's Beat It on MTV, music television. And Beat It was the first video ever by an African American or Black artist to be played on mainstream music television. And when Billie Jean was first aired, it drew a massive audience, right? And people were captivated by the images, by the dancing, and also by the special effects of the video that opened the floodgates for many artists thereafter. So Prince, Lionel Richie, Tina Turner, all these other Black artists, the hip hoppers, the rappers, all of these artists have got to thank Michael Jackson, because Michael Jackson opened the doors for African American artists' videos to be played in the mainstream daytime. Yeah. Like I said before, Michael Jackson revolutionized the art of videos. Another legacy of Michael Jackson is that he was the first artist to have 4 singles from an album to make the top 10. And that was Off the Wall back in 1979. Thriller had 7 singles to make the top 10. Again, being the first artist, and probably only the first artist, to have 7 singles for one album, making the top 10. Now, in terms of touring, Michael Jackson's Bad tour of 1997-98 was the biggest grossing tour until just recently. I think Beyonce or Taylor Swift took over recently. But that record stood for more than 30 years. Yeah, the world tour of Bad, Michael Jackson, between 1987 and 1998, drew millions and even record crowds. For example, at Wembley Stadium, that at the time held about 75,000, between 70 and 75,000 people. Michael Jackson sold 7 nights in a row. Yeah, being the first artist to play 7 nights in a row, sell out crowds at Wembley Stadium in London, England. Aside from this, another legacy of Michael Jackson is the artistry, his fashion, and particularly his dancing. Yeah, the way Michael Jackson danced in the videos, that set the template for dancing in music videos. So the dancing that you see today, Justin Timberlake, to a degree, Beyonce, Janet Jackson, or Bruno Mars, all these, Britney Spears before, Taylor Swift now, all these artists, right, that have dances in their videos, and particularly in the live concerts, that was all started by Michael Jackson. Yeah. So Michael Jackson has a huge, huge legacy that no matter what the mainstream media says or does, that can never be taken away from Michael Jackson. And it's actually, he actually broke every record in the music industry, from singles to album sales to tour receipts to videos, whatever you write. And it's actually in the Guinness Book of Records, as proof that Michael Jackson broke a lot of records. Yeah. So that's the legacy of Michael Jackson. There will never be another artist like Michael Jackson, never ever. Or maybe the one that can be like Michael Jackson probably has not been born yet. Yeah. So what's the legacy in a nutshell of Michael Jackson? And I'll leave you a couple of videos that would tell you more about the legacy this great man left behind. Now, let me tell you why they killed Michael Jackson. Yeah. And I've got a video that I'll put in the fullness of the show that will also explain why the white man had to kill Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson was a very, very smart guy. Yeah, it wasn't just about the music. He was also a shrewd businessman. Yeah, so Michael Jackson owned his masters. Yeah, so this is something that the music industry doesn't tell you when you sign a contract. Michael Jackson was smart. He knew this way back, when he was performing with his brothers as part of the Jackson 5. So Michael Jackson knew all about the importance of publishing and particularly owning one's music. Yeah. So he owned, when he left the Jackson 5 to become a solo artist in his own right in 1978, his contract gave him the right to own his masters. Yeah. Again, Michael Jackson was a very, very shrewd businessman. And in a chance meeting with Paul McCartney, because, Michael Jackson did a couple of duets with Paul McCartney. One of them was Say, Say, Say for Paul McCartney's 1983 album. And another was The Girl Is Mine for Michael Jackson's own Thriller LP. Now, during those discussions, or working with Paul McCartney told Michael Jackson that if you want to make money in the music business, because at the end of the day, it's a business, it's not really about the music, it's about the business of music. So Paul McCartney told Michael Jackson that I've been buying a lot of, publishing rights, because publishing is a big money earner, because every time a record is played, I get paid. So for example, if I buy, a back catalog of an artist, and if that artist's music is played on the radio or used in a commercial or played as part of the segment in the movie, I get paid. So Paul McCartney told Michael Jackson about publishing and about how you can make money from owning other people's music. So Michael Jackson took it in, and Michael Jackson thought about what Paul McCartney had said. And so in 1985, Michael Jackson bought the rights, the publishing rights, to not just the Beatles back catalog, but also to other major artists like Beyonce, like Justin Timberlake, like Little Richard, like even Elvis Presley. Michael Jackson owned the copyright to all those artists. And Michael Jackson, he bought that back catalog for $50 million back in 1985 after taking the advice and counsel of Paul McCartney. In actual fact, he actually outbid Paul McCartney for those publishing rights for the Beatles, Little Richard, Elvis, and what have you. To a degree that the friendship between Michael and Paul McCartney never really recovered. But Michael just said he did good business. So now, in 1985, that was after Thriller made him a global icon, global superstar. Buying this back catalog also made him a shrewd businessman and also made Michael Jackson very, very powerful in the music industry. Why? Because he owned, a back catalog of major artists like the Beatles, Elvis Presley, Beyonce, etc. Major artists. So Michael Jackson was getting paid every time a Beatles record was played or used in a film or an advert. Every time another song was played or used in an advert, Michael Jackson would get paid. So this put Michael Jackson in a very, very powerful position. So the record company executives couldn't manipulate Michael Jackson as they did with other artists. So Michael Jackson was a shrewd businessman. So Michael Jackson again kept on buying publishing rights from other artists, because he could afford it, because of obviously the money that he made from Thriller and the money that he made from the Bad World Tour, which, like I said to you, at the time was the biggest, grossing tour in history up until recently when I think it was Beyonce and just now Taylor Swift broke that record. So Michael Jackson had a lot of cash, so he bought a lot of publishing. That made him powerful. And so the record industry couldn't touch Michael Jackson. And so what they tried to do in the late 90s was to enter into a partnership with Michael Jackson. Sony Music, by the way, and this is Sony Music, entered into a partnership with Michael Jackson to part-own the back catalog. So now, as part of this agreement now, Michael Jackson essentially owned half of Sony Music. Now, if you know Sony Music, right, it's a massive, massive conglomerate. It's like Microsoft. It's like Apple. It's like a big tech company, or it's like a major, major bank like Barclays or Chase Manhattan. That's how big at the time Sony Music was. And one black man, one African American man, Michael Jackson, owned half that company. Think about it now. A black man owning half a multi-billion-dollar company. Yeah. And they thought in their naivety, not knowing Michael was smart and had a long game, that he was going to sell that back catalogue from the Beatles and Elvis, etc., back to them when they signed this agreement with him in I think the late 80s, early 90s. And so because Michael Jackson knew the value, the worth of holding that publishing, yeah, and Michael wouldn't sell, that's when now the record industry started to get Michael Jackson by calling him Wacko Jacko. Yeah, so before he bought that catalog, you didn't hear about, you didn't hear the media calling him Wacko Jacko. You didn't hear that he slept in the oxygen tent. You didn't hear about him bleaching his skin. All this negative coverage of Michael Jackson began in the late 80s, early 90s, when Michael Jackson refused to sell his stake in Sony Music. Yeah. So now, that's when the media bandwagon really began to hot up. He was bleaching his skin, he was doing this, he was doing that, and that still could not get him. And so what they did after that, they tried, they got people, young people, because Michael Jackson like kids. Doesn't mean that that you're gonna do anything automated with them, but he just like the company of kids, children, because Michael Jackson himself, because of he was a child star, didn't have a childhood. His childhood was not a normal childhood. His childhood was studio, hotel, going on tour, music videos, music video, going on tour, playing music, going on tour, hotel. That's it. That was Michael Jackson's childhood. So Michael Jackson did not have a proper childhood. Yeah. And if you read a lot of Michael Jackson's autobiographies and interviews, he openly says that he did not have a childhood. And that's why he enjoyed the company of children, because children reminded him of the childhood that he didn't have. Yeah. Sometimes Michael Jackson will allow children to come to his never land ranch and have like a sleepover, and enjoy the company of children. Yeah. But because the music industry wanted to get rid of Michael Jackson, to allow them to take over the shares of Sony Music, right? They put these slander on him that he was a pedophile. Yeah. And we all recall in the early 2000s, he went to court twice, not once, but twice, to defend himself from those malicious, scandalous accusations of somehow he being a pedophile. Now, as we all know, that didn't work. So Michael Jackson was acquitted of any wrongdoing, even though he had to pay, I think, or Jordan Chandler, one of the accused, something like 20 million out of court settlement. But we all know that was a setup to try and get Michael Jackson to sell his stake in Sony Music, because he became too powerful for the music industry. And so that didn't work. And so what they did now was that to kill him. Yeah, they had to literally kill Michael Jackson. Why? Like I said, because he owned half of a major record label. And not just a record label, but a major conglomerate. Yeah, that controlled billions and billions of dollars worth of music publishing and royalties. Yeah. So they didn't want this black man who was becoming now vocal through his music. If you look at Michael Jackson's, a latter part of his career, even in the early 90s, when he put a black or white, yeah, that, and if you look at the video for black or white, that was symbolic in terms of Michael Jackson may have gone from black to white physically, but mentally he went from white to black. That's what black and white symbolized, particularly with the Black Panther in that video. Yeah. So Michael Jackson was beginning to be conscious of himself and understood the environment that he was working on. Again, if you listen to songs like History, and even the video for Remember the Time, that was about ancient Egypt. And when he wanted his great friend, Steven Spielberg, to help him do the video, because it was about ancient Egypt and depicted ancient Egypt in the original way of Africans, Spielberg declined, Michael Jackson said, you know what? I'm going to use my own money to depict ancient Egypt as it was. Not white people, not Arab people, but African people. Because ancient Egypt was an African civilization, not an Arab civilization, not a European civilization, but an African civilization. And when you look at the video, remember the time, which I might put in the footnotes, you're looking at an African civilization. Yeah, and that's another thing that also got up the news of the music industry. But like I said, you know, when this charge of pedophilia didn't work, and also when the media started to slander him, i.e., he bleached his skin, i.e., his lips are oxygen tent, i.e., you know, he's a wacko jacko, blah blah blah. That didn't stick. Then they openly now wanted to kill Michael Jackson. Why? Because they wanted access to his share of that multi-billion-dollar company, Sony Music. And so this is where the Dr. Murray came in, and this is where, you know, they began to prescribe Michael Jackson with these pills that ultimately led to his death. But Comrade Murray, Dr. Murray, he was just a fall guy. He was the one that was used by the elite, by the white man, to kill Michael Jackson. Yeah? So unfortunately, June 25th, 2009, Michael Jackson was found unconscious because of these pills that had been prescribed to him via Dr. Corin Murray, via the white man. Yeah, because these pills ain't made by black people. We don't make these kind of pills. You know, these slimming pills or whatever. We don't make them. Yeah, they're made by Europeans and to an extent Asians, i.e. Indians. So that's how the elite was able to get rid of Michael Jackson, yeah, by using Dr. Karen Murray to prescribe Michael Jackson with these dangerous pills that Michael Jackson tragically overdosed. And so when Michael Jackson died in 2009, Michael Jackson still owned half of Sony Music. Yeah, it wasn't until 2016, 7 years after his death, yeah, that's when the white man was finally able to convince the Jackson estate to sell Michael Jackson's share in Sony Music. And even that, they had to pay money because, like I said, you know, that worth a lot of money. So something that Michael Jackson bought for roughly $50 million, the estate of Michael Jackson sold that catalog for more than $750 million. So even in death, Michael Jackson won because that was the biggest, you could say, return on investment in the history of the music industry. You bought a back catalog for $50 million, yeah? And it was sold by your estate, not because you wanted to, but because obviously you died and the estate had no choice but to sell it to your enemy, but you made a massive profit of about 500%. So from $50 million to $750 million. That's a massive profit. So even in death, Michael Jackson still won the music industry. And that's why Michael Jackson was killed, because he owned half of a major company, B, became too powerful for record executives, and C, they could not manipulate him to sell his share in that company, which is why they used every trick in the book to get rid of Michael Jackson. Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, they got their bing the end by, you know, getting one of our own to give him powerful drugs that eventually killed Michael Jackson. So that's my take. Well, it's not my take, it's a fact, because we will show you, like I said, I'll leave you the video in the footnotes as to why the white man killed Michael Jackson and why Michael Jackson had to be killed. Yeah, just to get that, you know, access to that ATV music publishing that is now worth multi-billion dollars. Yeah. So I hope you've enjoyed this special edition of African Focus, looking at the legacy of Michael Jackson, but more importantly, why the white man killed Michael Jackson. And so subscribe to the show if you haven't already. You can subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on YouTube. Subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on Spotify. Please share to your friends and your family. And if you'd like to donate to the show, click on the donate button, and you can donate as little as $3 a month. All right, and so until next week, where we look at Ghana's cedi, the best performing cedi or the best performing currency in the world this year. Is it accidental, or what's really behind the cedi appreciating against all major currencies? So that's going to be a very interesting take that we'll have next week for you on Ghana in Focus. So until then, for myself, Kwame, from all the crew here on Africa in Focus, is thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next week for some Ghana in Focus.